right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. But today on the show, we are actually back at FilmQuest for another part of our 7-part series of episodes that I recorded while I was up at the FilmQuest Film Festival in Provo, Utah. And today we are following up yesterday's episode on the Killgrin with an interview with the film's writer-director, Joanna Tsanis, and its lead actress, Konstantina Mantelos. And we have a great conversation coming up here. We're going to get into some of the puzzle pieces that we talked about on the main episode, get into some of their actual influences, and also talk about some really cool stuff, including the crazy creature that they came up with for the Killgrin. So lots of fun stuff coming up here. Before we get to it, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever it is that you're listening right now. You can just hit that follow, subscribe. It might be a little plus icon, whatever it is. Hit it and you'll find out about all the episodes as they come out, because we got a few more FilmQuest episodes, and then we're moving on to a live show on Heretic that I'm recording here in Las Vegas, and then we got a whole bunch more podcasts on the way, so make sure you're subscribed. You could also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and don't forget to join our Facebook group, the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces group, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. And with that said, I've been adding a little spoiler warning at the top of all of these FilmQuest episodes. We always have spoilers in Piecing It Together episodes, but you know, a lot of you are new from the festival, so I just want to make sure you know we do get into spoilers in these conversations. But with that said, let's get into our interview with Joanna Tsanis and Konstantina Mantelos. All right, so we are here with Joanna Tsanis and Konstantina Mantelos. Guys, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been a wild festival, a lot of really cool stuff. Have you guys been here at FilmQuest other years before this? Or
I was here 3 years ago with a couple of shorts, and every short film I've ever directed has been at this festival.
Oh, that's so cool.
But the last 2 shorts I directed, which got into the festival, I wasn't able to come because I was filming the Killgrin.
Okay, all right. What about you?
And I've never been, and it's been so exciting. I honestly, it's the most fun and enjoyable festival I've ever been to.
Everyone here just is super into these kinds of movies,
yeah.
And it's you could just feel it in that room. It's a pretty tight space, Valor, where they do the screenings, but it's super tight and fun, and everybody's just just having a great time with it and all that. How was your screening last night? How did you feel about the energy in there?
I felt good. It was a great energy. People were having a lot of fun. All of the humor seemed to really land, and people liked the scares and also the messaging. And we had a lot of really interesting conversations with people afterwards who connected with the themes of the film and the characters in the film. So that was really nice. Right
on. Well, let's go back first, and then we'll start getting into some of these influences. But tell us a little about how this project came together.
Well, 3 years ago, I directed a short film, and soon after that, I got an email from sort of a script competition place, and they were like, "Oh, do you have a feature?" And I didn't, and I was just like, "Yes." And then they had a deadline of a week, so I kind of vomit drafted this vaguely inspired by the short feature-length script. And then after, of course, I did not win in the competition or a place, and then I kind of looked at the script and I thought, there's something here. I should actually develop this into a proper feature-length script. And then one thing led to another, and we ended up getting greenlit. And now we have this really cool, weird monster movie that we're here at FilmQuest with. Right on. And were you two always working on this together from the get-go? No, with the short film, Konstantina actually started. Yeah. So when it came time to make a feature, I was like, it's got to be her, Yeah. What did you think, Konstantina, when it turned into a feature, basically? I mean,
well, there's so many times as an actor where, people are making short films and they're always kind of trying to convince you, you want to work on this short film. We have a feature concept. We're talking to some people. We're going to turn it into a feature. Joanna never did that, right. But I loved the short when she sent it to me. And so I was just down to do it. And she was always a little hush hush about the development of the feature. And next thing I knew, I was getting a message from the producer being like, we have this feature that is developed from Smile, and I was like, oh my God, it's happening.
Yeah. That's cool. That's cool. So we just had this conversation with some guests, and we talked about, we call them puzzle pieces on the show, movies that might have inspired the movie that we're talking about. And so I'm going to run some of those puzzle pieces by you guys, get some reactions to some of the movies we talked about, and then we'll also get into some of your actual influences and see if there's anything that we missed and stuff like that. I've got to start out by talking about Smile, the 2022 movie, which obviously has no relation to your short. When I first, because I watched The Killgrin on a screener before the festival, and when I first watched it, I did not know about your short. And as I'm jotting down my notes, I'm like, this kind of feels like it might be inspired a little bit by Smile. And then I find out you guys have a short called Smile, and this almost feels like one of those, the Deep Impact Armageddon situations where there's different movies that have similar concepts but are, coming out at the same time and are definitely in conversation. Did you think about that movie as you were kind of creating this into a feature from your original short?
No, because it hadn't come out yet.
Okay.
Or, when we were developing it into a feature. But I mean, the feature it's kind of inspired by the short, but it's not adapted from it. It's
Sure.
a very different concept. So I think in terms of a lot of films coming out that have similar themes or have the same title at the same time, a lot of things were being developed during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And because there was so much despondence at the time, and it really exacerbated the mental health crisis.
Yes.
When I had the short playing, there was actually an indie, like low budget feature called Smile playing that year.
Okay.
There was also another short called Smile on the
Yeah.
festival at the same time as mine. There was also a short in Spanish called Smile.
Wow.
And there was a movie called Smiler. And there was a movie called Smiles.
Mhm.
So as I was going on the festival circuit, there was a lot of conversations about, I directed this movie. They're like, oh, that one?
Yeah.
No, that one? The feature?
Yeah.
Oh, the Paramount movie? No, this one. So it was just like, in the end, I think for the short film, that was the best possible title for it. And I'm glad that we named it that. But yeah, in terms of logistically, maybe it would have been better to give it a different title.
Well, the Killgrin's a cool title. And
But the Killgrin,
yeah.
we love the Killgrin. And the funny thing about the Killgrin is I really love like the idea of creating a creature, because then it has its own lore and it lives past the film.
Sure.
And I wanted to have like kind of a punchy name, that this would be the name of the creature. I wanted to name the film after the creature.
Yeah.
And I was just like playing with different words and juxtapositions of words, and I put those together. And I thought, this sounds really cool. This sounds like a creature name. And I Googled it and I couldn't find anything named Killgrin. So I'm like, okay, I've got something. But I did find one thing, and this is such a funny story. I found an Xbox username, Killgrin, from years and years ago. I think it was like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I just kind of was like, okay, well, whatever, who cares? And then that year, I'm with my in-laws at Thanksgiving, and I bring it up. And then my brother-in-law says, that's my username.
What?
Yes.
No.
I'm not even kidding. So
That's
I was
like a
just like,
jump
is it
scare.
okay? I'm like, is it okay if I use it for the movie? And he's like, yeah, that's awesome. He's like, just give me the merch. That was my Xbox username. So yeah.
Oh my God. You never told me that.
That is the most random thing
I know,
I've ever
it's so random. Yeah, that's the most 21st century story I could have told. But yeah.
You know, something about the name, I got so used to associating the Killgrin with our monster, and I just sort of, stopped thinking about what it sounded like, what it meant. But when I tell people about the film, they get excited, and then they tell me what they think it's going to be about, or what they think the monster must be and stuff.
Yeah.
The term Killgrin like just has it's tasty, and it gives people an idea of what exactly this thing is going to be.
Yeah, it is. It rolls off the tongue, but it's also kind of hard to get out. So it's like, yeah. But, to your point about like, post pandemic, like, I think Smile and all these Smile related movies, with the masks for that whole time. Something that came up during our conversation was She Dies Tomorrow, which is a much smaller movie, but that's a movie that I think a lot of us remember as being one of those 2020 movies when we didn't have a lot of new stuff to watch, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And as far as these movies that are about these like inevitable mental health kind of related trauma things where something has happened and it is setting off a chain of events that you kind of can't get out of. You have to stop and just deal with it. And that's something I think that kind of comes up with the Killgrin as well, where this woman has to just kind of deal with what she's been through, these traumatic events that the character's been through. And that's obviously a much smaller movie, but as far as like that as an influence, I don't know, is that a movie that you guys are fans of at all?
I mean, so She Dies Tomorrow was not an influence because even though I've heard amazing things about the movie, I unfortunately have not
Haven't seen it
seen
yet.
it, but I would love to see it, and it's definitely on my list. I've
Yeah.
heard amazing things.
Right on, right on. Well, to a movie that maybe you have seen that we also brought up, speaking of the creature, the Killgrin, we also talked about Hellraiser and the Cenobites, which I feel like the Killgrin, talk a little about the creation of it, because it is a really cool creature, and I think he fits standing around with those other guys in the background.
Oh yeah.
So.
Okay, so in terms of the creature and the visual language of the creature, the way it moves, the way it looks, that was very much inspired by Hellraiser.
Yeah.
I love Hellraiser.
So
and the original short that this feature is based off of, there was actually a voice cameo by Ashley Lawrence, who starred in Clive Barker's Hellraiser, which was really cool. And so that was an inspiration in terms of the visual language of the creature. And when I was kind of conceptualizing the creature and talking to the creature designer Adrian Bogg, who's just phenomenal, and the PFX guys at Butcher Shop Effects Studios, who are amazing. It kind of started with the lore and the theme of the creature and built off of that. So I sort of told them that it needs to look like something that you're scared of, but you also pity at the same time, because the creature, since it's born from pain, it's in constant pain. That's why it wants to kind of end its existence by tormenting its host.
Sure.
So yeah, that was sort of the in its infancy. That's what was the creature conceptualization was. Yeah.
We were also talking about Goya's paintings and like this kind of thing where it's like something that just feels like it has to be there. It doesn't really have a choice. It's not there because it wants to torture these people. It's there because it has to, and that kind of comes across on the face of the Killgrin. Yeah.
I have Goya prints in my home, so probably I never actually articulated that was an influence, but it must be, because I'm probably just looking at them and being like,
yeah, it's out there. What about the creation of it? You mentioned the name of the designer. As far as some of the gore and some of that kind of stuff, was it a mix of practical and CGI, and how did you kind of come to that combination?
Sure. The monster is entirely practical, and there's a number of gimmicks throughout that are practical, and then there is some VFX as well, and there's also some practical gimmicks that have green screen paint and that incorporate VFX too.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I imagine also the upside down spout. That must be a weird thing to see as it's coming together as an actress, to see your face doing these things.
Well, most of those, there's some VFX used to kind of worsen them, but all of the sort of broken jaws, all the kind of my face getting stretched down, those were all prosthetics that we worked with. So, on set, on the day, I got to see, what this thing looked like, and it was this bizarre feeling, and this sort of well, in a sense, I didn't have to imagine anymore, because I could see, I glanced in the mirror and I could see my face being sort of pulled and stretched and tormented, and that's one of the benefits of getting to work with practical effects. It's getting rarer and rarer, and as an actor, it's such a treat.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if I had just asked that question and she's like, it wasn't an effect, and she just turns to me and turns her
she
face
just
down?
says, I just happened. It's like people fit their fist in their mouth and stuff. She's like, I actually have.
That's why they cast me. It's my weird party trick.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one that we brought up was Drag Me to Hell, the Sam Raimi movie. As far as the beginning of the movie, when she goes to the tarot reader, and she's kind of exploring these alternative, ways to help her situation. And this movie is a little heavier. It doesn't go as wacky Sam Raimi, but certainly the idea of the self-help path proving to be kind of, it doesn't help in the long run, and she has to go find her own way of helping herself. And I don't know, did you guys have experience with those kinds of worlds, with dealing with those kinds of things before writing this movie?
I mean, first of all, I just want to say Sam Raimi is an influence of mine, and he's one of my favorite horror directors, and I'm so glad that the humor in the film landed, because you're always a little worried, what if people don't understand these moments are meant to be funny and weird, but then when you get showed in front of an audience, they do. It's just such a rewarding moment.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I do. I actually, when I was in high school, I was struggling with something, and I ended up going to a psychic just because I lived in downtown Toronto, and they're everywhere, right? These $10 psychics,
Mhm.
and a psychic actually told me there was something wrong with my aura and tried to sell me crystals. To I don't know if it was
As they do.
crystals or what it was, but she tried to sell me some orb-looking thing,
Yeah.
and then I said no, of course, because it was quite expensive, and I was 16. I probably, if I had some
Yeah.
money when I was 16, I probably would have bought it.
Yeah.
And then I just remember her looking at me as she was doing, she's like, "You're really not going to get this. You'll see." And I'm still here, so I think it's okay.
Hey, you could use that as a prop on this movie,
Yes,
though.
for
So
sure.
it would have been an investment.
But I do think everyone has their own ways of coping and their own types of self-help. There's a character in the movie who he does it by constantly partying, constantly socializing. He can never be alone. If he's alone, he'll be alone with his thoughts. So he's always drinking and partying and being around people. And then the main character, her ways, she's explored all different kinds of methods leading up to the film, whether it's prescription drugs or it's crystals or it's essential oils or meditation. And we all have our own ways of exploring self-help, and sometimes it's kind of feels like this unending surreal experience.
Well, to that point, I mean, not to bring up the pandemic again, but I mean, I do feel like I've seen at least 3 or 4 films during this festival alone that deal with either self-help or some kind of self-betterment.
Definitely.
And I think it's just something that we're all just kind of trying to figure our way forward since, just a crazy couple of years. And so it's something I think that's definitely in the air. Another one I wanted to bring up, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Was that something on your mind with this one?
I love Nightmare on Elm Street, but no, it's not one of the influences, but I do love it. So, all these movies you're bringing up, like, who knows, maybe in the back of my mind, they're influences, but I do love Nightmare on Elm Street, but it wasn't an influence for this particular film.
Okay, all right. But did you think about Nightmare on Elm Street or any of these others so far that we've been talking about with the character?
Well, this is an interesting question. Something that I find quite interesting is that, you mentioned she dies tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Joanna and I have had discussions about sort of like, before going into this process, our own kind of like differing tastes in horror films. And, I really do love these sort of quiet, atmospheric, psychological, like, She Dies Tomorrow, I felt was this kind of new thing of like existential horror, like, it was when we started working together that I realized Joanna's tastes and her style and these sort of more audacious kind of films kind of making their way in, and I felt like I kind of merged the two ideas when approaching Miranda and realizing this kind of world she lives in. I think she lives in sort of a dark, atmospheric, quiet, in her own head constantly world, and the world around her is shocking and violent, and it's just her coming up against that constantly.
No, that's a really good point, because I mean, it's a very heavy story for the character, but it's also a very big story for the rest of the movie. And so that definitely, I could see how that's kind of two different approaches to what's happening within this movie. So I think that's a really good point. One other thing, and this is one that we didn't talk about, but it was kind of in my back pocket. I never actually got to it. But The Shining as like aura, as something that's like in there. But I don't know, any thoughts on that, or the Dr. Sleep follow-up?
I mean, who doesn't love The Shining?
Sure. So good.
It wasn't particularly an influence for this film, but I think it's an influence on every horror filmmaker.
Horror. Yeah. Right on. Well, let's talk about some of the things that you did have on your mind. Were there any like specific things that you were kind of like working with as possible comps when you were kind of putting this together?
Okay. So not so much with stylistically the direction of the film, but with the script and the development of the core concept. Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cairo, which translates to Pulse, the original Japanese horror film. That's one of my favorite horror films, and that was something that was an influence on the core concept of this entity that's born through misery. Because in Cairo, for those who haven't seen it, it's basically a film about loneliness and about people who become so lonely that they essentially disappear and cease to exist. And it's an absolutely phenomenal horror film, one of the best. So even though stylistically it wasn't necessarily an influence, this I would say that like the Sam Raimi is more so. It was definitely for the story an influence.
Yeah, and we ended up talking about The Ring at one point during the conversation, and just kind of we're saying like J horror in general as a possible
yeah. Oh yeah,
influence there.
The Ring is one of my favorites too, so that's
Yeah.
definitely there.
Okay, all right. So that's a great one there. Any others that were big influences on this?
Yeah, so Midnight Mass, the Mike Flanagan show,
Okay,
a little bit of that just in terms of these kind of quiet conversations between people struggling and making sense of their situation. And I think that perhaps ours is a little more humorous and a little more on
Sure.
the Sam Raimi side, but in terms of especially the scenes between Miranda and Brian, there was a little bit of that Midnight Mass influence, and I love that show. Who doesn't?
Yeah. I'm not the biggest Mike Flanagan fan, to be honest, and so like it's just too serious for me.
serious.
But so
maybe that's
definitely.
why I injected so much Sam Raimi
Yeah,
into
exactly, exactly. But you're right. Like so many other people do love that show, and so yeah, I could see that for sure. Any others you wanted to bring up, or any from you, Konstantina?
Well, it's funny. Joanna hadn't told me until recently that Cairo was an influence on the film, and I haven't seen it, but I really love Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cure, and it was so funny when she told me that that film was an influence, or his work was an influence, because something that I felt when going into shooting, when starting to realize, what the nature of this film was going to be. I'd been watching a lot of Flanagan and Midnight Mass, like at the time. I think it might have come out around that time. And so I had this idea that it was going to be this kind of film. And then when I started to see her ideas for the project and how it was coming together, I felt like there was something a little more, I keep calling it like something a little more like punk rock about her tastes and the approach to the film. Something a little more like 90s and grungy and the films that I thought of at the time were like Cure and Seven and this kind of grungier horror that really is quite contrasting to this kind of more clean, atmospheric thing that we've been seeing a lot recently. I even I was like hearkening back to my high school days without intending to. Like I started listening to a lot of like Rise Against while we were shooting. It was something kind of punk rock and roll about the nature of this horror. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that goes to the creature design and everything. The other thing you were just saying, though, it kind of brings me to another question I wanted to ask. Something we were talking about in the other conversation, the ending. Talking about the kind of varying tones, we're talking about how it's funny, but also the drama of it all. When we eventually get to the police, like actually shooting at the thing, and like we just thought, we were talking about this in the main conversation, how interesting of a thing that we couldn't even think of like a comp for something like that, where this supernatural entity is there. Maybe I don't know. Just maybe talk a little bit about that, because I just thought that was such a cool and fun kind of way to kind of wrap up the action of the climax.
I mean, I would hope that you would shoot at the bad guy,
Yeah, right?
So it's kind of like, it makes sense that particular character, that police officer, would be able to have the strength to do that, because she isn't at the state that Miranda is. The thing about the Killgrin is that the more miserable you are, the stronger it gets, and because it is born from pain, so it's in constant pain. It wants its host to be at this abject level of misery, so that the Killgrin can be strong enough that it can just consume you and destroy you.
Yeah.
And that way, it can kind of, have its relief. And so I like the idea of having this kind of character, this sort of unhelpful but still flawed, but at the same time protective character played by Ramona Milano, who's fantastic, Detective Fleck. So for her to come in and just have a very normal human reaction,
yes, exactly.
I think that. I didn't realize that would be something that would strike people, because for me, I'd be like, yeah, that's what I would do.
Right. I would just shoot that thing. But yeah, for sure. No, I love that. And I think it just kind of speaks to like the different tones that are kind of on display here. And it makes it a really interesting story and ending. But I think it's a really good place to kind of wrap things up as far as the influences and all that kind of stuff. What's next for you guys? What are you guys working on?
Before I say what's next, I will say that Greg Yatanis is my favorite TV director, and everything I do is just kind of somewhat influenced from him, just because of the character-driven scenes, especially Quarry, which is or Quarry, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's one of my favorite TV shows of all time, so that's always an influence for me. In terms of what's next, I'm developing a couple of projects. One is a horror film / family drama that would be shot in Crete, Greece, which is actually like my homeland. I'm a Greek Canadian dual citizen, and also we are developing a limited series, Conspiracy Theorists in the Woods. We won't share too much, but it's very relevant and very cheeky and very Sam Raimi, actually.
Nice. Nice. That always makes me happy when I hear that. But are you working on anything else aside from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously working together with Joe on this idea that we've got together, and my own feature that I'm developing, a vampire movie that I am really excited about. But also, this process was such a special treat, for an actor to get to work with someone that, has become such an amazing friend and whose vision I respect so much and so excited about. And so, I'm constantly just in a place as an actor of, searching for that next great collaboration, the next director that whose ideas excite me. And I mean, I'll keep working with Joe till the end at this point. So
Right on.
The feeling is mutual.
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for doing the show, and hopefully we can get you back again sometime for another episode of Piecing It Together.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about the Killgrin. Thank you so much to Joanna Tsanis and Konstantina Mantelos for joining me on that one. And thank you to you for listening. If you're enjoying Piecing It Together, make sure you are subscribed. We've got a lot of episodes on the way. And if you hit that subscribe button, you're going to find out about all of them as they come out. Wherever it is that you're listening right now, you can get subscribed. You can also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. Join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. Don't forget, we do have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, from Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. And speaking of my music career, I always close these episodes out with a piece of my music, and this whole time I've been just playing random tracks to just kind of fit the vibe, and I'm realizing that I should play some music that was from some of my music videos that played FilmQuest back in the day. This was in the 2017 edition of FilmQuest. This is a track called Back Into the Dark from my album Head Like Fire, and my stop-motion animated music video made by a visual artist named B. Landers is what was in the FilmQuest Film Festival that year. And this is one of my favorite music videos I've put out, and I've always loved this song a lot, and I think it actually does fit the vibe pretty well here with the Killgrin. So let's go with Back Into the Dark, and we will be back with more Piecing It Together tomorrow.
an All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.